tuned in to Night Vision Radio, exposing the truth one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us. Welcome to Night Vision Radio. Good evening, everybody. This is Night Vision Radio, and I'm your host, René Barnett, coming to you from the fiery Southern California. Want to give a shout out to all our friends in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. Here in Los Angeles counties, yeah, we've had the fires, but we cannot complain. It's nothing compared to what our neighbors are going through up north of us, and just wish everyone the best of luck and thank our firefighters and first responders for getting everything under control, and not just our Southern California first responders, but all those who came from other states to lend a helping hand. And we haven't had much to complain about down here in Los Angeles. Mostly, it's been the air quality, and you can still hear it in my voice. Last week, I lost my voice completely, so I had to cancel the show. But we're going to carry on this week, and hope you'll forgive my little scratchy voice. But we'll go right ahead, because I'm really excited about tonight's guest. He's coming to us all the way from Bolivia, and I'm so excited to have him. Actually learned about his work through another friend of mine and of Night Vision Radio's, our good friend Court Lindell. And I think they've been brainstorming on a couple of things and shared some insights and maybe some research together. And so I'm very happy that Court introduced me to my guest tonight, and he is a writer, an explorer, and a researcher. He is Dave Truman. Dave, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Oh, thank you for asking me. I really appreciate the request. So, yes, let's get started.
Well, as I told you, or I guess I should say warned you ahead of time, South America, the Andes, Peru, Bolivia, those are places that my research hasn't really stretched into, although as I shared with you, and it's most of my listeners know, or at least people that have tuned in before, know that my areas of research have taken me oftentimes to Europe, to the UK, and to France primarily, and then some of the United States, although our history is not as deep here, at least as far as architecturally and things, although we are finding things now that we never knew were here before from some of our native tribes that we know now are here.
And everything. Yeah.
Absolutely, thousands and thousands of years ago, if not millions. So I actually, Dave, many of the listeners know I grew up in Oklahoma, which of course is where most of the native tribes were pushed into by what was the government at that time, the U.S. government. They were on what was known as the Trail of Tears, and there are 39 tribes headquartered in Oklahoma, and 120 or something like that tribes that are represented there. So I grew up with that history all around me, and 20 miles down the road from my parents' front door were the Spiro Indian mounds, and those. Never knew as a kid growing up that those things were so old. And then go about 60 miles south of that, and there's the Heavener runestone. So there's so much history there that we never really paid attention to right in our own backyard. And it's funny how now things are taking me right back to where I grew up again. But what I would like to know is, how is it now? You grew up in Liverpool, is that right?
Near Liverpool.
Near Liverpool.
Somewhere called, it's a peninsula. It actually sticks out into the Irish Sea between Liverpool and the coast of North Wales. So, like you, I've grown up in an area where I wasn't very far from lots of stone circles and other ancient monuments that exist in Britain, and I spent a lot of time sort of being fascinated by these places early on. But I suppose something just triggered my interest in the Andes, and it was relatively recently, really. The thing that did it was I read a book by a guy called John Major Jenkins, and it was called Galactic Alignment in 2004. And in that book, he has a chapter devoted to the site of Tiwanaku in Bolivia, which is just directly northwest of where I am now in Oruro. He basically explores the idea that the builders of Tiwanaku may have known something about astronomy, in the sense that the site of Tiwanaku seemed to line up with the galactic center at certain critical times. And this just got me thinking, and I basically got a flight over to, I think it was Chile, and travelled up into the Andes from the north of Chile and spent some time at Tiwanaku. And it all sort of flowed from there, really, after that. And the more I learned, the more I found it was fascinating in all sorts of respects. Sorry, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. When I was looking through your material, and I saw the material on Tiwanaku, and I'm learning very much as time goes on to pay attention to words and names and things and relationships of names of places. And I couldn't, the more I kept going past that word, I kept thinking of Tijuana, New Mexico, and I wondered if there was a relationship or if you know.
As far as I know, no. But you can never tell with these things. In fact, the name Tiwanaku is a bit of an anomaly. Nobody actually knows where it comes from and where it originates. My friend here, where I'm staying, Luis Gutierrez, he thinks it was a name that was given to the place quite late on, possibly in the Inca times. And then there are all sorts of stories about it. It's the place of the guanaco, which is a type of wild llama, which actually lives further south in the Andes. The older Aymara Indian name for it was Taipitala, which means the stone in the center. And it's a sort of, I'm sure you've come across through studying places in Europe, certainly Greece, Egypt as well, in North Africa, the idea of a sort of geomantic center with a stone, an omphalos or something like that. This Taipitala is really the sort of, if you like, the South American equivalent of that. There are so many parallels with having a sort of geomantic center with a stone that forms the center of a particular area, a focal point for the consciousness of a tribal group, and the focal point for their sort of religious or spiritual aspirations as well. And it was very much like that the concept of the Taipitala, I think, needs to be considered.
Now, when you talk about geomancy or geomantic center, now does that imply that structures, buildings, or other sites were placed on particular locations to cause some sort of result, some sort of positive result or a success, or in this case, possibly, a connection to a higher consciousness or spirit or something like that. So geomancy or geomantics is the purposeful placing of things. It's not a natural site, right? It's peoples have worked these things out, and they've placed these things at certain points or meeting of certain lines or according to certain constellations that to serve a purpose.
Yeah, the placing of, or the location of places like Tiwanaku, where I am now in Aurora, which is in a line directly southeast of Tiwanaku. You can actually draw a line on the map from here to Tiwanaku. It goes straight through Tiwanaku and up straight through Cusco and right the way through the those concentric circles you've got on your Facebook page at the moment.
Yes.
Morai. That alignment goes straight through there and right up. It's over 2,000 miles long. And whoever devised this knew something about the dimensions and the curvature of the Earth for this alignment actually to be there. And they could survey this huge distance as well. And that is one of the great mysteries that's fascinated me about this whole situation, about the geomantic placing of all these ancient sacred sites that even go beyond Aurora down to a place called Inca Pokhara or Pokhara Grande, which lies just southeast of here, which is this huge pyramid, which looks just like a normal sort of hill in the Andean landscape, but actually is a huge vaulted structure that has been constructed artificially on the top of this mountain. And you're talking about 2,000, 3,000 mile alignment right away along the line of the Andes. It's just absolutely baffling how people had the scope and the ability to create this, and had the surveying and the geometric knowledge as well as the geomantic knowledge to create such an alignment, and for what purpose. But there does seem to be a concentration of something that attracts people to these places, something devotional, and that's part of the fascination of it all.
And in the sophistication that seems to be displayed in some of these sites. Now, I have placed that picture in the chat room for those of you who are listening but not watching. You can go to irnchat.com and join us. You don't have to register or anything. You can sign in as a guest, or you can just watch. And I'll be posting pictures throughout the show of some of the things that we're talking about. And we're talking about these circles at Moray, and it's amazing. But it kind of goes back to your real passion, doesn't it, of these ancient, very advanced civilizations that may have existed. I believe they did exist in the past, and you say possibly pre-pleistocene. And I think I put something slightly erroneous on my Facebook page when I said, which was over 2.5 million years ago. Well, that's when the Pleistocene age or era ended, but it actually began, what was it, like 11.5 million years ago or something like that. So we're talking about 11 million years ago?
Well, I'm not, I wouldn't go, I don't rule that out, because I think if you study the cultures and the cosmologies of lots of ancient cultures around the world, you'll find that many of them conceive of time as cyclical anyway. But what I'm really talking about is the period of the last ice age and the transition from the last ice age to our current geological era. So really, I'm focusing on civilizations that maybe existed 30,000 years ago.
I see.
During the last ice age, and came to a sudden and abrupt end in a series of catastrophes that took place between about 12,800 and 11,500 years ago, which is the traditional view is that the ice age ended very slowly and the earth warmed up and so on. But there's increasing evidence now that wasn't the case. The earth was warming up until about 12,800 or 12,900 years ago. And then suddenly, for some unknown reason, or there are reasons, it plunged into another ice age for about 1,500 years. And then suddenly it warmed up again. And that was the start of our era. And lots of people in all sorts of areas, some geologists and paleoclimatologists are now saying that we went through this huge period of instability, if you like, a sort of cosmic period of storms. and we were subject to lots of cometary impacts and explosions. There were coronal mass ejections, which sent cosmic rays towards the Earth and burnt everything. Lots and lots and lots of volcanic activity, a host of things, and huge floods. And when I studied the mythology and the legends of the traditional people who've lived in the Andes for many thousands of years, there's a surprising fit between this catastrophic scenario, interpretation of the transition from the last ice age, and what they say in their legends about what happened. I mentioned Inca Pokhara a few minutes ago. There's a whole series of legends about what happened there. This great structure that's built on top of a mountain in southern Bolivia, that suddenly the sun went dark and there were earthquakes, and then this huge sweep, like tsunami of water swept down the Andes from the northwest. And the people took refuge in this place, and they waited there until the water subsided, and they could start rebuilding what's been destroyed in the catastrophe.
Wow. Now, did you, in any of the legends that you've studied of the cultures there, when they talked about what they saw happening, did they talk about the reasons? Did they have ideas? Did it have anything to do with the advancement of the civilization and the misuse of, nuclear power or anything like that you know of?
Yes. I mean, there are surprising numbers of parallels in these sort of catastrophe and flood myths from around the world. And in the Andes, many of these are associated with a personage called Wirral, yes, and actually the great alignment of all these sacred sites was called by a Peruvian mathematician who sort of rediscovered this, the way of, or the root of Wirral. And Wirral is probably a combination of a number of different figures, but he was regarded as the creator god by the Incas and the earlier civilizations. And he, according to some accounts anyway, he arrived after a great flood that I spoke about, really. I mean, this is from legends further north in the Andes. And he rebuilt everything. He taught people how to farm and how to settle and how to measure things. And he's said to be the person who actually constructed Tiwanaku. There's a very interesting account in one of the Spanish chroniclers, a guy called Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa, who spent a lot of time writing down all of these legends just after the Spanish conquered the Andes.
Now, is he the guy that you wrote about that went to Mexico and faced the Inquisition and then ended up going back and facing the Inquisition again in Spain or in Chicago?
No, he's the one. He's quite an interesting character, actually. Although his history of the Incas, which is what he wrote, which all these legends he wrote down it was a piece of pretty outrageous propaganda to justify the Spanish conquest of Peru and Bolivia and parts of northern Argentina. He wasn't really a member of the elite. He was a person who had to live off his wits, and he was also a pretty good scholar and investigator, and he had a lot of time and respect for the indigenous peoples here, particularly the Incas. And he actually, when he wrote down these legends and included them, he made sure that they were true representations of the Andean traditions. So when he writes about Wirral as part of his history, saying that after this great flood, he came along and he carved statues of all the different peoples who lived in this part of the world. And I think that's a representation of one part of Tiwanaku, which is called the semi-subterranean temple. And you can see all these carved faces or heads of all very different types of people who, if this is linked in with this account of Wirral culture, does suggest that in this period, which I think is at the end of the Ice Age, there were lots of different types of people living in the Andes before the catastrophe hit. And then a little later in this account, Viracocha tells his servants actually to go out after the flood subsides and call the people back down from the mountains, because he's ordering them to rebuild what has been destroyed. And he specifically says, go down to the Great Sea in the south and call the people down from the mountains. And that's probably here, in this part of Bolivia, which is further south, because this was once, at the end of the Ice Age, all of the Altiplano in Bolivia was a great sea. It was covered in seawater, basically. And it's still, the lakes that are still here are the remnants of that great sea. And the recent archaeological excavations in this part of Bolivia have shown that some of the first settlements during that very early period were actually in this part of the world on the sides of these salt lakes as they started to recede and evaporate. So there's odd things of truth in these ancient legends that seem to be remarkably accurate. The problem is that the academic scholars don't put these bits of information together. So they'll just dismiss somebody like de Gamboa, saying, no, he's just a Spanish imperialist or whatever, and not look at the fact that he wrote down little gems of truth, even though the overall work is probably very much a work of propaganda.
Sure. I mean, I find that in a lot of research, you kind of, especially in things like, in researching Inquisition documents. Now, you're reading it from the point of view of the Inquisitors or of the Roman Church, but you can still sort of back into the information, knowing what you know about the writer, about the author of the material. So yes. I know what you mean. And the same with a lot of other like religious writings, in things like history, and you can sort of know what their take on it is, and then you can still pull little gems of facts out of what they're saying. So I know exactly what you mean. Now, how was it that your focus became South America? How is it that was what grabbed you? I know I read you said, when you were a kid, people always asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up, and you said an archaeologist. So you always had this interest in the past. But why did you go in that direction?
Well, I mean, I did say earlier, I think, about the trigger was really reading that book by John Mason.
Oh, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah. So that was where I think
what was going on there was that I was responding to something. I don't know. It's hard to put your finger on it. I if you like, I was called to go to Tiwanaku, and that was what gave the push to do it. But I've been going there since 2004, nearly every year. So it becomes like a pilgrimage for me, And I can't really put my finger on why. That impetus should be there, but I was just drawn to the place, and then the more I started to learn by doing research in various places, the more I started to get a wider perspective and sort of understand the business about this great alignment, and it just becomes more and more fascinating. But I think ultimately it's a sort of spiritual imperative really that I've picked up, and I can't really put it in words, although I've got a lot of words that I can talk about various aspects of it. I don't know if that sounds...
No, I think I understand. I mean, I do feel like we are kind of drawn to certain places, and there's usually some reason for it, either some, possible ancestral connection or cellular memory, or it could be, as you said, a spiritual connection. It's funny that you said the first time you went was in 2004, and you've been going back nearly every year ever since. And that's sort of been exactly my story with going to Southwest France, because that was the first time I went was in August of 2004. And I had always felt drawn to that area and continued to be, it's like anytime I get a chance to travel, I head there. I never go anywhere else, and I'll probably never going to see the rest of the world because I can't stay away. I keep going back. So I get that. It's really interesting. So now
I had a period of being drawn there, by the way. Around 1990, late 90s, early 2000s, I went to Carcassonne, various places, Rennes le Chateau.
Yep.
Yeah. So I know exactly
that's
what you
where
mean.
I go. Absolutely. There's a couple people in the chat room who are some of my fellow travelers. In fact, one actually ended up moving there, and she's now living in Peru near where I guess Moray. And
right, which is
yeah,
the alignment
absolutely.
I was talking about. Yeah.
So, but yes, that's where we go is the, Rennes le Chateau, Rennes le Ban area, Carcassonne, that region, the Languedoc, and just can't seem to stay away. But, and I'm suspecting that these geomantic aspect of your research is sort of where you might have crossed lines with Cort Lindell in his work.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's this whole business about the alignments, really, because I mean, Cort's much more adept than I am at using Google Earth with these things. But it was my contact with him and sort of listening to what he had to say about his own research that got my mind working on this, and also being able to use Google Earth. Because what was interesting, I mentioned that this alignment was first rediscovered in modern times in the 70s by a Peruvian mathematician. Her name was Maria Scholten-Debnith. And she actually discovered the alignment running from Tiwanaku right up into the north of Peru, a place called Cajamarca.
Now, are we talking about the Nazca lines, or just the alignment?
No.
You're talking about alignments between locations.
Yes, I mean, basically, think of it in terms of the Andes. It's the world's longest mountain range. Obviously, it runs up north through Central America and then becomes the Rockies. Yeah? But in South America, what's very interesting about the Andes is that the very southern part of them runs almost directly north-south until you get up to about the 18th parallel, which is just about where I am now, actually, in Bolivia. And then suddenly the alignment of the Andes turns directly northwest, 45 degrees. So it runs northwest, southeast, 45 degrees. And that is also the angle of this alignment of sacred sites that run down the spine of the Andes from the north of Peru, actually probably just past that onto the coast, right the way down to where I am now, and down to the site that I mentioned a little earlier, Inca Pucara, which is just southeast of here. And there's a relationship between the actual land itself and the mountain range and the orientation and the geometry inside that mountain range and the sacred sites that lie within it. And those sacred sites have been built in specific places. Now, Cort's work was interesting to me because, of course, with Google Earth, you can actually make alignments that take into account the Earth's curvature. Yeah.
Yes.
And several researchers after Maria Scholten-Debnith have tried to extend this alignment, and they've taken it to various different places, but they weren't correct. Once you looked at it in terms of the curvature of the Earth. And what I discovered once I picked up from Cort how to do this really was that the alignment actually comes through where I am now, Aurora, and goes on to Inca Pucara. And I didn't know about Inca Pucara, just southeast of here, until I was actually traveling up into Peru from Argentina in 2013. I knew that the alignment went across this obscure hill somewhere in the Altiplano. I thought, oh, so what? I didn't know it was a sacred site or anything. And it was only when I decided to spend the night in Aurora before I was planning to go up to the capital in La Paz that I stayed in the place where I am now and discovered that this place that was on the alignment on Google Earth was actually a sacred site. The one that I told you had all these legends about the great cataclysm sweeping down, and the people taking refuge inside the they call them whackers here, the sacred place at the top of the mountain, until the water subsided. So it was another weird sort of synchronicity that happened to me. That I just happened to come to a place where the people knew all about. Somewhere that I just thought was a nondescript hill on a map, which is actually a very ancient sacred place that of reverence here.
Wow, that's amazing. You know happening. What? I completely believe in that. One of the people in the chat room mentioned the synchronicity today of me posting that picture that we just spoke about. She said, "That's right by my new house." I said, "That's which is really funny."
Exactly on the same alignment. If you drew a line directly 45 degrees northwest from where I'm sitting now, you would come to that place, Morai, thousands of miles away in sort of southern Peru.
Wow, that's amazing. You know what? We're going to have to take a quick break. And when we come back, more with Dave Truman and more secrets from the Andes. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Night Vision. I'm your host, René Barnett. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Dave Truman. He's in Bolivia right now, doing some more work, doing some research and some writing and exploring down there. And he's revealing some of the ancient secrets of the Andes. Some fascinating information that we're getting here about alignments, geomantic alignments of certain locations.
Right now, save 50 to 70% off at Banana Republic factory stores and online. And 60% off absolutely everything at Gap factory stores. Save even more with 40% off clearance at Gap factory stores. And at Banana Republic factory, sweaters start at $19.99 and scarves start at $9.99. Hurry! Search our store locator for your nearest Gap factory and Banana Republic factory store, or shop us online.
Dave has been doing a little bit of work with Court Lindell on some of these alignments. A lot of you guys know Court from this show and from his work that you've seen on the internet. And now, we were talking about this site in sort of, you were talking about how you had, these coincidences keep coming up.
Yep.
Now, can you talk a little bit more about that, and also about, I mentioned to you on the break a couple things I wanted to bring up that just sounded fascinating, but I think there's some connections that you wanted to make before we do that.
Yes, I mean, I spoke about what sort of meeting people here, knew about this hill that I'd seen on the map and thought nothing of until I learned it was an ancient sacred site. There was another thing that happened to me towards the end of 2012, actually. It was December. I was going on one of my almost annual trips up to Tiwanaku, and it was a pretty horrible day, actually. Storms here are nasty. And I was wandering around the site, sort of sighting things and observing stuff and taking notes and things, and I bumped into these two French guys there who were carrying a compass. And we got chatting, and they were saying, "Oh, well, yeah, we're interested in the magnetic fields around here and things like this." And then we went off to, there's a site next to Tiwanaku. Some people have got it as the same place. It's called Pumapunku, which in the Aymara language means the gateway of the puma. And anyway, we sort of going around, and we noticed when one of the guys held this compass next to a particular block of grey andesite, which was marked with two Andean crosses, which are sort of like equal arm crosses. But the orientation of the compass shifted from magnetic north to 45 degrees magnetic northwest. Now that's a bit strange, because that's exactly the alignment that we had plotted on the map on Google Earth. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, they said they had to dash off to go back to Peru. Weirdly enough, one of them anyway is some sort of aeronautical engineer of some sort. I never saw them again. But the next year I went back and I bought my own compass, and I decided to check it wasn't just some kind of fluke. So I went to Pumapunku, went up to one of the stones with this Chicana relief carving on it, and lo and behold, the compass bent to 45 degrees magnetic northwest. Oh, that's interesting. So I then started looking at other pieces of andesite, grey andesite, which is what a lot of Tiwanaku is built from, marked with Chicanas. And I found this other stone in another part of the complex called the Cantatalita. And this particular stone seemed to have even more powerful properties for bending the orientation of the magnetic field. And to cut a very long story short, I found that actually the compass didn't just bend to 45 northwest at this place. Sometimes it went all the way around to bend to point towards magnetic south, 180 degrees south of magnetic north. Other times it would be at 90 degrees, and other times it would be at, magnetic southeast as well. There was a distortion in the magnetic field, but it varied according to the circumstances that were going on at the time. For example, if there was a storm coming in, and you get many storms that are almost like tornadoes falling on the altiplano, the energy levels would rise, and the distortion in the magnetic field would rise with it. Yeah, and at one point it even got to the point where the compass needle started spinning anti-clockwise direction. A bit strange. But what's odd about it is that the changes in the magnetic field are not arbitrary. They're always in intervals of 45 degrees going around the compass. Now that's, I think, because the people who built these sites along this great alignment, and certainly at Tiwanaku, they understood things like the telluric currents in the earth, and they engineered them to create certain effects. And you see similar things going on at other sites as well. A little further along the side of Lake Titicaca, there's a place called Amaramuru, and I sometimes take pictures using something called an old field filter, which is just like an old-fashioned 35mm slide filter, but it's got some kind of sort of laminated plastic in the filter that, according to Henry Oldfield, who developed it, is capable of detecting subtle energies, whether you want to call it the ether or whatever. But at particular sites, he thinks that it can pick up things like subtle energies that may focus around sites. And this place, Amaramuru, is on the side of Lake Titicaca. It's just on the Peruvian side of the border. And it's about, I don't know now, it's probably about a mile from the actual shore of Titicaca, because the water levels have gone down over the years. And I went there one day, and it's basically in this place called the Forest of Stones, Bosque de las Piedras, which is a really weird sort of place. It's all sandstone, outcrops sticking up out of the sides of the hills, and the wind and the weather over millennia has worn the sandstone down into all these strange shapes. But there's this one piece of sandstone that stands there, and it's definitely got this, what looks like this huge door. Hello?
Yep.
Sorry, David. Sorry.
Okay. It's got this huge door cut into it, about 20 feet tall, and a bit broader. And then within that, there's a small niche. And when I went there, it's another ancient sacred site, and it's another punku, another doorway into another dimension, just like Pumapunku. It's actually got that figured out. And there was a ceremony taking place. There were actually a lot of people from, I think, the States and Britain and things that were actually there. It was with a shaman. And so I was just taking a few pictures, and I thought, oh, it'd be fun to take some with the filter to see if the ceremony might have had an effect on the ambience around this place, which is reckoned to be a portal. And I got this one amazing picture come out of it, where it shows this sort of vortex, a rainbow-coloured vortex around the doorway. And there's no way that this is just some trick of the light from the use of the filter, which is a sort of laminate, like I said, because it's a curve of light, of different coloured lights. And you can see that something's actually, as part of this vortex, is actually hitting the doorway and bouncing out. You can see the energy ray bouncing out. I've found similar experiences at other places, and somehow whatever's going on at these places seems to interact with human consciousness there. There's another place in the north of Peru called Chavindahuantar, and I was there in February of this year. Again, it was another horrible day, and there's nobody there at all apart from this group of people. But there was a guy there who was a shaman, and he was in the underground part of this complex. It's a very unusual place. And he was doing some kind of ceremony, and I was just about to go, and I thought, oh, I'll go and take a photograph of one of the most famous features in this site, which is it's called a tenon head. It's actually a head. It's half feline, half human, that's inserted into the wall. And he and a group of other people that happened to be there, and they were doing some kind of ceremony in front of this tenon head. And after it all finished, I took a snap of this head in the wall, which looks like half human, half cat. And you can see this burst of energy coming out of the nose of this figure in the form of a bright rainbow colour. And if I take a picture before some ceremony takes place, you don't get that same concentration of energy there.
That's wild. Now, we probably should mention that your website is called LostScienceOfTheAndes.com. And I know I did see those amazing pictures of that doorway at Amarumuru. And I don't know if the one you just described is on there, but there's certainly...
It's actually on the header of the website. If you go to the website, that's the picture.
Oh, I see, the very top.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, my gosh. That's a real picture?
Yeah, that's a real picture. That's how I snapped it. And I was so amazed. I just sort of looked at it in the monitor of the camera, and I was going, what? Because I'd had one of these really horrible days, when you go sort of doing investigations, and you draw blanks everywhere. And I was actually trying to find something else. And I'd been to Chavin a couple of times before, and I thought, I'll just pop in there. I might as well make use of the day. And I was soaking wet. And I saw this picture that I'd just taken, and I looked round, and the people who'd been doing the ceremony had all disappeared. I was running after them saying, look at the picture I've just taken. But I never saw them again. It was really strange.
That is amazing. I mean, did the colors, when you were looking at them, appear that vibrant?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, because these are not pale. These are
through the lens of
vibrant.
Sorry?
These are vibrant colors. These are red and blue and purple. Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I'm not entirely sure how it works. I mean, there's not that much on Harry Oldfield's website about it. But I mean, he's done lots of work in. He was part of the Dragon Project many years ago, so he went around a lot of British sacred sites, and he had equipment. He developed the sort of Curlian photography methods a lot more, and he's done a lot more sophisticated stuff now with his PIP system and so on. But he says, that it's linked in with that, but I've not really got much information from him specifically on how it works. All I can say is that I was very skeptical about using this filter, even when I started using it. And I've gone back now to look at photographs that I've taken, and I'm amazed. I mean, you're probably aware of that really famous picture that was taken in Mexico a few years ago, where the guy managed to photograph a column of light coming out of the El Castillo pyramid there. And, it's just on the platform of the pyramid. And it was as a storm was approaching, Well, funnily enough, he didn't have one of these filters, but funnily enough, when I was here in Incas Pucara a couple of years ago, I was just going to climb up the side of the plaque at the sacred site, and the storm came in, and I thought I better not, because I was on my own, and if it's water's falling, like, you can fall and slip and everything. So I just decided to take some photographs of the storm as it hit the Inca Pucara, and using the filter, I got two different pictures showing this column of energy coming from the storm down into the top of the Huaca. And I thought, it's probably just a trick of the light again. But I studied and studied and studied two photos that show this column of light, and I took them from different angles, and yet the column comes down to the same place on the top of this great sacred site of Inca Pucara. It's absolutely amazing once you start looking at this stuff with an open mind.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, yeah, I've seen that pyramid, but I don't believe I've seen that picture. I would love to see it. I'm going to have to look to see if I can see it on the internet somewhere. But
yeah.
And that's in May. Oh, yes. Okay. I've just found it. And that is amazing. Yes. That is wild. I'm going to put that in the chat room, people. If you're listening, you should go to irnchat.com and you can see what we're talking about, these columns of light. You know, you mentioned telluric energy before, and you also mentioned, that you had spent some time around, Rennes-le-Château in the area. And when we were there, I don't know if Court told you, but my background is in television and film, and we were doing a documentary, based largely in that area. And, of course, there's all the legends of treasures and, buried patriarchs in the area, all kinds of things. And the old mayor, the former mayor of Rennes-le-Château, told us at the time, he said, the real secret to Rennes-le-Château is not, gold or even documents. It's the telluric currents, the telluric energy. And we were, at that time, I didn't really know much about that. And we just thought, well, I wonder what he means by that. And, but later on, I sort of came to know, and there actually is, an energy to that place. There are energies, I should say, and you certainly can feel them. And sometimes, particularly in the village of Rennes-le-Château, the energy can shift or change. You'll go there one day and it feels a very different way than it might have the day before or the last time you were there. So I do believe that, some of these things that particularly critics might be criticizing in terms of, this is just New Age hocus pocus talk. I think there's a very, very scientific base
there is.
For this. And certainly, we are electrical beings. So why wouldn't there be some interaction between the, electrical energy of the earth and our electrical energy? So you were saying it seemed that, the people had an effect, on the sites. There's probably an exchange of energy going on there, I would think. And that doesn't have to be silly or hocus pocus. That can be just scientific fact.
Oh, it is scientific fact. I'm absolutely certain of it. I don't know if you've read any of the books by the late John Burke. I mean, he studied this in a lot of depth. He actually went to Tiwanaku to look at the telluric currents there and the way they interacted with the site. He also went to Chavintawanta, where I said, I saw that strange emanation from the nose of this feline human on the wall of the statue. And he conducted, experiments into seed germination by placing sample seeds inside, for example, the Akapana pyramid at Tiwanaku when a storm approached, and having a control sample of seeds, and then growing the two sets of seeds afterwards. and finding that the ones that had been treated, if you like, inside the pyramid when the electrical storm was coming in, grew much stronger and yielded huge, crops in relation to the ones that weren't. But I actually think these places have multiple functions. I think there was a sense in which these fluctuating magnetic fields affect human consciousness, and I think that sites like Chavin, Zapanta, Tiwanaku, and Inca Pacara down here in Bolivia were engineered in ways to affect human consciousness and to bring about, if you like, altered states of consciousness, out-of-body experiences, what we might call today remote viewing. One of the great strange things that I've always found so fascinating, if you look at this on a global scale, I mean, we've been talking about this great alignment, but lots of researchers have noticed that there seems to have been a very ancient coordinate grid of the Earth, just like we have today, only the prime meridian went through Giza, if you read any of the stuff by Carl Munk and so on. And it's no coincidence, I think, that when Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were doing their experiments into remote viewing in the 70s at Stanford Research Institute, what did they use as the means of creating targets for their subjects? They use grid coordinates to go.
That's true. That's true.
You take these coordinates, you go to this place. And I think that actually that was a revival of something that was very ancient, that was to do with the ancient grid system, which is almost identical to the modern one, except the prime meridian went through Giza, not Greenwich. And it's very odd because from what I read about that work, it was, how was it now? Yes, it was the guy who they used as their first subject, the artist. His name eludes me now.
Ingo Swann.
Ingo Swann, exactly, yeah. He was the one who suggested to them that they use grid coordinates. It wasn't Targ and Puthoff, because he had some kind of practical insight and practical knowledge of what was going on. Maybe it was some kind of remote memory that he had from some sort of shamanistic past. I wouldn't know. But it's curious that he was also the person who suggested to them that they call it remote viewing.
Yes, Ingo Swann was an absolutely amazing genius of a person, and I did have the opportunity to speak with him on a few occasions, which I'm fortunate for now since he's left this plane. But we've just recently talked about him on the last couple of shows, which is very strange. Here we go again, because we had on Lynn Buchanan, who was one of the remote viewers, who of course was trained by Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, and who came up with the protocols for the U.S. military's remote viewing program. Ingo keeps popping up. I'm going to have to, an interesting note on that is that another sort of passion of Ingo Swann's was Marian apparitions. And he actually wrote a book. You can check it out. I think that book came out in about 1996 or something like that, or about various Marian sightings around the world, and which I thought was kind of interesting considering his background, what he was doing, and then he was also, as you said, he was an artist.
Yes.
So he had quite a varied background, but they all seem to sort of feed each other. The artistic side, the sort of spiritual side, and of course the scientific side. And I think that may be the answer to a lot of these, big questions about our past. I think there is a combination there, and I think people tend to lean one side or the other. Either they go the left brain or the right brain. But I think there is a sort of synchronization of the hemispheres, of the brain that probably we used to enjoy at a time. And maybe these people, these ancients, maybe they were more adept at that, or maybe they hadn't had that kind of separation of the hemispheres of the brain, which allowed them to integrate science and spirit. I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think it goes back to Julian Jaynes and his bicameral mind as well, in some senses, doesn't it? That the right-handed side of the brain was the part where the gods spoke to the people. And I think what struck me about all this sophisticated mathematics and geometry as well, it's as if the people who created these things didn't think of them in a sort of analytical way that we do. It was almost as if it all came at once as a sort of almost a visionary thing.
Yes.
A bit like, some people who are sort of high-performing autism can do incredible mathematics. It's as if it happens in an instant. Or that, they're incredible composers as well. It's as if they have this instantaneous contact with something which is not broken down into constituent parts. It's all of one thing, and it can manifest in one way, like that.
I think you're right. I've noticed, and sometimes, in my very, puny and paltry artistic endeavors, I used to write a lot of poetry and song lyrics and things like that. And I remember when I had the best work that I ever did, it seemed to just sort of fall out of me. It wasn't as though I was thinking it. It all appeared sort of in one piece. It all came out together. And I always felt like I couldn't take any credit for it because I didn't think about it. It just sort of came out, and it was in a whole piece. It wasn't like it didn't come line by line by line, So in a much bigger way, I think maybe people in the past had this ability to access, and like you said, some autistic people. I've seen that, some amazing things done by people that are autistic. They're they'll know one subject inside and out. There's nothing you could ask them that they wouldn't be able to answer. I've met several in my lifetime, and it is quite amazing. And it's almost as if they're accessing some part of their brain that we've sort of shut off or something, maybe.
Oh, I think we have. Particularly in sort of Western culture. And I think that's another thing that draws me to this part of the world, because you meet people who have a fundamentally different vision of reality. And I think that's what the ancient peoples had, much more than we have. Now, we've sort of excluded a lot of things from consciousness so that we can get on with, I don't know, making things that seem to make us happy but don't really.
Oh, exactly. You know what? It's time to take another break. Hey, welcome back to Night Vision. We're talking with Dave Truman from Bolivia right now, where he's exploring and researching and writing and looking into the secrets of the Andes and the ancients and advanced civilizations and all kinds of really, really interesting stuff. We've been talking about alignments of locations, or the science of geomancy, it's called, where a purposeful effort is made to set up alignments between certain locations for some kind of benefit, be it energy, positive energy, be it success in business, be it a spiritual connection, and so much more. So we're down at the bottom of the show, and so I'm looking at the chat room. Everybody's very, very engaged and talking about all kinds of things that we're talking about. But now, Dave, what is it that you're looking into specifically, if you can talk about it? Why are you in Bolivia at the moment?
Well, I'm here actually I'm going to go to Inca Pucara, or Pucara Grande soon, which is, as I've said, just to the southeast of Oruro here. And I'm taking a magnetometer and a compass with me to just take some more measurements to see exactly what's going on with the changes in the magnetic field here, and whether I can take some more photographs like I mentioned I did a couple of years ago here. But I'm also going to write a chapter for the book on this part of Bolivia, which is Oruro and Inca Pucara, because the carnival in Oruro goes back way back to some of the earliest inhabitants of the Andes, called the Uru people. In fact, the name Oruro actually in the original language is Uru, and it was their sacred center, and it was originally, according to the people who researched it here, Bolivians who live in Oruro, it was actually huge. If you like, if you can think of something like, the Glastonbury Zodiac, you've heard about it.
Yes.
Mort would say. It was like that. There were these huge geoglyphs showing all of these different mythological figures in the Uru's world, and the cataclysms and changes in their legends as well. They're all mapped out here. And these ceremonies eventually turned into, over thousands of years, what is now the Uru Carnival. So I'm interested in finding out a bit more about that and the Urus and their early history. And again, that these places at such an early date form part of an alignment that goes for thousands of miles up northwest through the Andes is what's I find so incredible. But this alignment is weird because it relates to history and prehistory in all sorts of ways. There are strange critical events that happened during the time of the Incas along this alignment that are quite uncanny. I mentioned earlier Cajamarca, which is at the northwest end of the alignment, if you like, in northwestern Peru. That was the place where actually the Spaniards took power from the Incas. It was where they tricked the Inca Atahualpa into providing a ransom of gold for them, and then decided to do away with him anyway after he filled this house full of gold was managed to take away. So that event, which was absolutely a turning point in the history of South America, the arrival and the defeat of the Incas by the Spanish, occurred on this alignment. Then 40 years later, if you go take the alignment down to Cusco, the main square in Cusco actually sits exactly on the same alignment. And this was where the two Incas actually were assassinated by the Spanish. Tupac Amaru I, who led the rebellion against the Spanish in the 1570s, and then Tupac Amaru II in, I think it was 1782, who led a rebellion against Spanish rule. So all of these curious events happened along this route of viticulture. It's quite uncanny. It's as if...
The holidays are almost here, but you can still treat yourself at Guitar Center with deals like a Fender acoustic electric guitar or a Mitchell electric guitar launch pack with amp. Your choice, just $139. Plus weekly doorbuster deals, special financing, the newest and hottest guitars, drums, keys, and more, and exclusive gear you can't get anywhere else. Check out our new location in Daytona Beach, located in the One Daytona Shopping Center. So hurry in and find your sound at Guitar Center.
There's some kind of loop going through time, and events in time that seems to line up with this alignment going through the Andes.
You know, you were talking, you mentioned Peru, Cusco, and Peru. You know, the most famous site, I believe, for Americans anyway in Peru is of course Machu Picchu, and a lot of people associate that with extraterrestrials. And it's said that there's a sign at the top of the mountain, welcome ovnis, or, you know, bienvenidos ovnis, or something like that. Now, in the cultural history, in the ancient history of the area, is there any mention of any kind of things like gods from the skies or anything?
There are some mentions, yeah. I mean, I think, you know, you said about people from the States visiting Machu Picchu. Every time I talked, you know, just chat with people in a cafe or something about why I'm here, inevitably the subject comes up of extraterrestrials. I I find it very difficult. I think it's a good question, and I think it's actually, funny enough, I was just talking about it before I came down to talk on the phone with some people here where I'm staying. I think it's more about actually having more than 3 spatial dimensions, and that a lot of these experiences that people say happen in these places is because they're having experiences with some sort of altered states of consciousness. Now, that doesn't mean that these things are illusions. It just means that perhaps we need to think a bit broader about the nature of UFO experiences and contacts, that the world isn't just the 3 dimensions and solid matter, but the universe is actually much broader. And I think people are actually making contact with real entities, but those entities may not necessarily be from another physical planet, or they may be from another part of the universe, for all we know, but not necessarily from another physical planet.
Right, and you were talking about these locations, what could be a portal to other dimensions or another reality. It could also explain, a lot of times when you hear people talking about seeing these, flying objects in the sky, these ships, they'll just pop off, or pop on, and which could be explained by, shifting in or out of another dimension. And of course, science is just now getting to the place where they are agreeing that, there are parallel universes, parallel dimensions. So I think it's another matter of us catching up with our science, I think, and then we'll explain a lot of things, because just as, in ancient times, if someone had, seen an airplane, they would have thought that was some kind of magic, saying it's just something we haven't figured out yet. Maybe we figured it out in the past, but maybe we forgot it.
I think so. And I think we also, as a culture, if we can define ourselves as a unified culture, as a scientific culture, if you like, there's a certain degree of hubris about the modern world. We think we've got it all sorted and all the answers, but do we really? I mean, we still don't have a unified field theory in physics. There's, in simple terms, we can't match up the very big to the very small. There isn't one thing that binds it all together. So we don't have all the answers. And maybe the ancient people did have, in many respects. Maybe they understood the nature of reality in a much more profound way than we do today. I think we genuinely lost a lot in the years since the end of the last ice age. That's how I would characterize it.
Well, I do think we, probably have made a big mistake by thinking of people that came before us as being primitive, and therefore just not really paying much attention. But I think that it will.
Absolutely. I mean, in the research I've just been doing a chapter before I came out here this time. I was looking at the effects of what a catastrophe might have been here, and then I was looking at the evidence, and the evidence is not as straightforward as the archaeologists like to tell you. There are all sorts of odd things in the altiplano that don't match up. Finds of tools that's in the same place, stone tools. Some of them are really well-made fine tools, bifacial tools, alongside really crude ones. And the assumption, for example, that people lived in caves because they didn't know how to build shelters or sophisticated buildings. Or maybe they lived in caves because everything had been wiped out by some flood or catastrophe and cometary impacts and goodness knows what, and they were taking shelter there. And what's interesting about many of the cave paintings that you get up in Peru, certainly, and there's some very interesting ones down here, is it seems to be the shamans who were organising people to help them sort of, first of all, organise themselves into large bands so that they could go out and hunt whatever animals were left alive, but also teaching them many, many things. It's as if they're almost like the Wirral figure that I mentioned earlier. giving people ground rules and ways, techniques, and trying to save practical and spiritual knowledge at the same time, because they didn't see the things as separate like we do.
Right. Now, so did I just hear you say that you'd been there for 3 months this time?
Well, this trip is going to be for 4 months, actually.
Wow.
Just about a month now. Yeah, I came out on the 15th of November. So I usually do. I don't like doing winter in England for all these reasons.
So you are still based in England?
Yes, yeah, I live there. I have a house there, and that's where I do most of my writing and research. Obviously, I do a fair bit over here, so
Sure.
it's going back to primary sources and trying to trace things back to the originals when I do the sort of book research. But actually coming out and visiting sites and taking measurements and carrying compasses around and doing all those sorts of things is very much part of it as well. And going to museums and libraries here, they're really important. There's stuff in the libraries here in La Paz which has absolutely amazed me. It's the paradigm is shifting now, but the idea of Clovis first, that the first peoples came across the Bering Strait during the Ice Age, and that somehow they managed to come all the way down here in 1,000 years, and down to nearly to Tierra del Fuego. That's going out the window now because there's so much information around about early inhabitants of South America and North America that were way before the Clovis people came across the Bering Strait. And I found a lot of material in the library in La Paz, which is of archaeological digs that were done in the 1950s, just when they started doing Carbon 14 dating, actually, that show that there were people on the Altiplano here 30,000 years ago. Who were making stone tools and what have you, and I'm beginning to think that many of these great polygonal blocks of stone that you see in Cusco, Ollantaytambo, these huge megalithic buildings, or the bottoms of what are now current buildings in the city, they probably go back 40,000 years at least.
Wow.
And Tiwanaku probably about 11.5, at least in the way that we see it now. Because there's been astronomical dating done of the cornerstones of one of the temples there that goes back to 11,500 years. And that coincidentally is just at the end of the Ice Age, when the floods had subsided. And the legends tell us, as I said before, that Viracocha came along and he constructed Tiwanaku. And if that's the time, then that fits in perfectly.
Wow. Well, you had mentioned Lake Titicaca earlier, and, I noticed on your website you had something that you'd written about it, and the heading was something about the terrestrial source of creation.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
This is something that it goes back to geomancy again, and the idea of the Omphalos, the centre, the geomatic centre. It was the place from which creation sprang. Obviously, around the world there are many of these places, but you get the same basic concept in many cultures, in Egypt, in Sumeria, of, for example, an island rising out of the waters and creation emanating from there. In the Andes, it took the form of another part of the Viracocha myth, which was that Viracocha rose out of the waters of Lake Titicaca and created the sun and the moon, so that the world was no longer dark. And from that sprang everything, and all of the different tribes of the Andes were named as part of this creation process by Viracocha. But very much about this sort of the idea of an island rising out of the waters, and there's a particular part of the island of the sun, which is closely associated with that, and it also became linked in with the origins of the Incas as well. The first Incas, Mamorochlo and Manco Capac, were also said to have arisen from the island of the sun at a place called the Lion Cliff, or the stone of the puma. Very, very interesting. But the strong parallels with cultures around the world I found in this mythology.
And, it's amazing, isn't it, how, we're finding out new things about such ancient past all the time, and how we now know what travelers a lot of these people were, and especially the seafaring people, the seafaring cultures. They were traveling all over the world. And that's why I asked you whether or not, there was any relationship to Tijuana in Mexico, because of it sounded a lot like, the same word, almost, because it seems like these people were traveling all over.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't doubt that, in fact, the more I look into it, the more I realise that there were very definite connections between Peru and Central America. There's archaeological evidence now that shows it. They found a stone of a avocado here. They've carbon dated back to 14,500 years ago. Well, on the northern coast of Peru, actually, not in Bolivia. That's quite curious, because wild avocados only grow in South and Central America. And in any case, people in the last ice age never ate avocados, because the wild ones were all stone and no flesh. They were eaten by these huge animals like sloths and mastodons and so on. So it suggests very strongly that not only were there links between Central America, Mexico, and Peru, but also that there might have been trade by sea between the two places, and that the avocado was probably, or the stone that they found was probably from a cultivated stone. So people were deliberately cultivating avocados 14,000 years ago in South America. The other part of it is, of course, the potato. We take potatoes for granted today. They've done genetic studies on potatoes recently that's shown that, because wild potatoes are poisonous, they're members of the deadly nightshade family, and there's something like 200 species of wild potato, which all originate in the Andes, up and down the mountain range. But they didn't just become edible by chance. Somebody on the present-day border of Peru and Bolivia, on the sort of in the Andean range, actually 10,000 years ago, worked out how to cross different types of wild potato to produce edible crops.
How did they figure that out?
Well, I don't know the absolute details how they traced the genomes, but they traced the genome lines back to this particular place. So somebody actually did it deliberately. This didn't happen by chance. Somebody was actually working on cross-pollinating different species of wild potato to produce an edible crop.
That's pretty sophisticated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've got things like avocados, you've got potatoes, you've got tomatoes is another one, you see, because there's some people think that tomatoes actually originated in the Andes and then were traded up into Mexico and Central America and grown there. Which is a possibility. But there was sea trade. People travelled by the sea, I'm sure, 10,000 years ago. Absolutely.
Yeah. I agree. We're finding things, even in the United States, remnants of things that, maybe not that far back, but certainly, we're finding Viking things. Some people believe the Knights Templar made it this far. And even Phoenicians and others from ancient times were traveling to the Americas. It was unbelievable. But so you've got another 3 months to go in Bolivia. Then you're going to go back to England. It's going to be starting to get a little bit warmer by then, so it'll be nice. And then you're going to get back and you're going to write this book.
I've actually written most of it already, René.
Oh.
I'm like I said, I'm here in Aurora because I'm going to do a bit more research on this part of that great alignment, and then I'm going all the way up to the north of Peru, Cajamarca, which is at the top end of the alignment. I'm going to do a bit more research there as well. But there's a couple of bits that I need to link in, but that's the plan.
Oh, when do you expect that the book might be released?
Hopefully sometime next year. I need to work out publishers and things like that if they'll take
well, keep us surprised, and I'll post it, so that people can see how to get it. And of course, they can check back on your website. I'm sure you'll have information on it there once the time comes.
There's the Facebook page as well, of course. So people
absolutely.
can get in touch there. In fact, I only started that less than a month ago. And I can't remember how many people have actually joined, but I'm getting about 50, 60 people a day asking to become part of the Facebook group.
Amazing. Fantastic. Yeah. Oh, so you're a newbie on Facebook.
Yeah, I suppose so, yeah.
I resisted it for a while, but I think I've been on since around 2008 now. But I went on kicking and screaming. I didn't want to do it, but it is very useful, and it's wonderful for keeping in touch with friends all around the world. So
absolutely, yeah,
I love that, and sharing information, especially, it's really interesting. I was thinking today about you, coming on the show, and how, I met you through Court, and Court and I have talked about this a lot, about how, one person has this piece, and they live in Germany, and another person has a bit of information, and they live in Mexico, and so we've connected with all these people all around the world that have little bits of the puzzle, and how that's what you've done with Court, is you guys have taken each other's work and sort of melded your own, and it brought you to another dimension. So it's amazing how that works, and that Facebook is good for that. That's for sure.
Oh, definitely, and getting dialogues going as well with people. I've just been putting stuff up that I've photographed in museums and things. It's quite interesting, people's reactions to it. Because I've gone for not obscure but lesser known places, because there are amazing things here. I mean, you mentioned earlier about Machu Picchu, which is an amazing place, but there's so many other places that are much lesser known and don't cost as much to visit either.
Yes.
Because they do charge a lot to get to Machu Picchu. It's become a bit of an industry, unfortunately. But there are many places in the north of Peru. There's such incredible sites. There's a culture called the Chachapoyas that lived in the head of the Amazon, in a district called the Amazonas, and they used to build huge cities up at the top of the mountains. And there's one place there called Kuilap, which is well worth a visit. And they're very interesting people, and every time I go there or see some of their culture, I'm reminded of the Celts, funnily enough, because of the shapes of the houses they built. Like the Celtic round houses with the thatched roofs.
Right.
These were almost identical. And again, many of them were apparently blonde-haired and fair-haired as well.
Oh, right. I posted some of those pictures on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
they look red-haired,
Oh, those are the mummies. Yeah, that's on the coast, the Caracas people and so on. It's really strange that as well.
Well, gee, Dave, I hate to say it, but I think we're just about all out of time. I wanted to mention your website one more time. It's called LostScienceOfTheAndes.com. Also, hit Dave up for friendship on Facebook while you still can, because his list is filling up fast. So get in there while you can. And then we'll get all the latest on when his new book is coming out. So we'll be very excited to hear all about that. But Dave, thanks so much for coming on, and I hope you'll check back with it.
Me quita mi boca.
Save 50 to 70% off at Banana Republic factory stores and online. And 60% off absolutely everything at Gap factory stores. Save even more with 40% off clearance at Gap factory stores. And at Banana Republic factory, sweaters start at $19.99 and scarves start at $9.99. Hurry! Search our store locator for your nearest Gap factory and Banana Republic factory store or shop us online.